Hi, this is Sean from Nine the Gallery here. We're here to introduce Emmett Graham's new series, Life Connected Through Time. Emmett, thanks so much for being here. We're really stoked. I've been looking forward to this series for months and months and months, watching it develop over the last really 2 years. Really excited to talk about the works. I know you put so much into these and there's so much detail and expression in them, and the stories they tell are just incredible. I'm really excited to dive in and really talk about your work. Tell me about the first 3 works that you worked on that you knew the series was coming together.
The first 3 works that I started working on was the one that I have with me right now is the King of Diamonds. Then the second one that came about after King of Diamonds was Generations. And the third one that came along was Graffiti. And the way those 3 came about was from me doing research on Mesoamerican culture and how the Aztecs viewed life in general and where everything is today amongst people who are a mixture of Spaniards and Mesoamerican natives.
So cool. I think this is such an amazing story that you're able to tell. And I know you're so passionate about it because this is part of your family roots, correct?
Yes. I mean, I've traced back my family all the way back to the 1840s on my dad's side. And I traced back my family roots on my mom's side all the way back to General Putnam. So there's a long history in my family. So I'm very excited when I was doing these paintings about researching history.
And I think a lot of people, especially where we live, have those roots and maybe don't even know about them. And I just love what you've done, and you're able to tell that story. Really, I want to kind of go through each piece and just tell us a little bit about what we're looking at. I know there are little things that you put in, and there's so much symbolism that just on quick glance that it's sometimes difficult to take it all in.
So the first piece I'll discuss is the King of Diamonds, which is the one I have right next to me right here. So the King of Diamonds is basically the turning point, the major turning point between the Aztecs and the Spaniards. So if you really look at this, you have the iconic skull, which was a major design in the Aztec culture. The skull itself represented Mictlantecutli, which is the Aztec god of death. And then you have the symbol of the European crown. But what I did with the European crown is I inlaid a lot of Aztec symbolism within that crown to show that 2 empires were clashing together. So if you look at the crown, you can see that the 3 points on the crown are actually a representation of the Aztec Triple Alliance.
As you were working on this series, what was influencing you outside of art or outside of your studio that really kind of pushed you forward or kept you going?
The one thing that kept me going was my own desire of understanding oneself. Because I'm a firm believer that if you don't have a foundation to stand on, nothing will be built upon it because it will fall. Since that's the core belief that I have in me, then everything I do in my life has to be that way. So one thing that kept me going is that I built a foundation, and I needed to continue to build upon that foundation to have it be something sturdy and solid. So when people look at it, they know that it's not something flimsy, that it's something solid and real. And I had to do that in my artwork to show that.
Can't argue with that. I think you just basically defined the concept of integrity. Let's talk about Tangled Up in Blue.
Tangled Up in Blue is about how the Spaniards changed the alcohol process of the Aztecs. The Aztecs had an alcohol process called pulque. When the Spaniards came and changed it, it became tequila. Now, what's interesting about how tequila came about and why it was changed by the process, before the Spaniards came to Mesoamerica, they went to the Philippines first. When they went to the Philippines, they brought some of the Filipinos with them, and they showed them how to do alcohol processing and fermenting. So when the Spaniards came to Mesoamerica, they used the technique that they learned from the Filipinos, and that is how the process was changed. So now we went from pulque to tequila.
And everybody wins.
Yeah.
I think that's always, like, for me, like the biggest takeaway is that how we're all interconnected is beautiful. How does your background influence your series?
Basically, growing up when I was in Pueblo, Colorado, it wasn't uncommon to see Mexicans, Native Americans together, going to school together, and basically exchanging culture and having the same cultural ideas. But when I left Pueblo, Colorado, and I went to the East Coast, it was a total change. It was hardly any Native Americans, hardly any Mexicans culture going on. It was mostly European. And so I touched into that side of my family too, which is the European side, which is how I learned about General Putnam. Then I got interested in the Civil War, and I got interested in the Revolutionary War. And a funny story is the main reason why I passed history is because of Iron Maiden. Believe it or not, a lot of their songs have to do with historical things that happened in the past, such as the Trooper, which was a war in 1800s where the cavalry completely got wiped out. Another song that they did was called Power Slave, which was...
Power Slave, that album is my favorite. I was hoping you were gonna get to that. Power Slave is like, that's the one.
Well, a lot of people may not realize this, but the song itself, Power Slave, was a point of view of the pharaoh who was dying.
Iron Maiden was a huge influence, especially visually. Their artwork was just as important as their music, but you're absolutely right. They did have those interesting undertones about those sort of things. I suppose that's kind of the magic why they were so good. So tell us a little bit about Generations. I know this one is one of my favorites.
Generations is basically about the Aztec goddess, Cihuateteo. The Aztecs believed that when a woman was giving birth, that it was a war between the gods and the soul that was coming into their world. If the woman gave birth, then she was considered victorious against the gods because she captured a soul, a person. If, however, the woman passed away during childbirth, then she had lost and she becomes a goddess. And as a goddess, as Cihuateteo, she was sitting there singing the sun as it went down and singing to the song as it rose up. So that is what generation represents. It represents the matriarch or whatever, that woman figure in our lives that was always standing behind us and watching us grow into adulthood and making sure that we are walking a righteous path. And the interesting thing about, if you look at the crown on Generations, you'll see that there's a red flower on the left and a red flower on the right with a yellow in the center. And that is to symbolize the rising and setting of the sun that Cihuateteo would sing to, because they believed that she was singing to the sun because she could not sing to her own kid to go to sleep.
As you were working on this series, what was one of the biggest challenges you ran into while you were executing?
The biggest challenges I had when I was working on this series was actually doing the research and trying to find the stories that I needed to do the paintings that I wanted to do and have actual validation of those stories. The reason why it was so difficult was because you would come across so many different stories that were either misguided, not true. When the Spaniards came over, a lot of Mesoamerican culture was destroyed. So trying to find stories that were actually valid, that were actually true and actually recorded, that was recorded by the Spanish monks, it was hard.
That's one of the beautiful parts of you as an artist, if not completely thorough. And really my favorite part is the simplicity. It's easy to tell a big story long-winded, but how you dial down and make the work so simple to speak so much is one of my absolute favorite parts of you as an artist and you as a person. The painting 1,000 words, this one's a little different. So walk us through this one.
1,000 words is referencing, again, how the Aztecs communicated, how they told stories. The Aztecs kept a book, and in each one of those books, they were always artwork or drawings or pictographs, never words. It was always drawings conveying the story that they wanted to tell. Time goes on, a lot of their culture is destroyed or gone. The friars went ahead and did the pictographs too, but they added their words into the books to explain what the pictographs were. Then as time went on, they lost all of that and went into written word. Then there was a gentleman by the name of Jose Guadalupe Posada, who was a newsprinter or a printmaker and working in the news industry. Jose Guadalupe Posada saw how the government was treating the indigenous people at the time and saw it as an atrocity. He also saw that the people who were mestizo or who were Native American were losing their heritage way or turning away from their native way and turning more to the European culture side of things. So that is why you see a lot of the skulls called Katrina, which was him making fun of the idea of the Native Mexican people turning away from their native values to more European traditions. So then more stories goes on, and then we have the camera, and now we are today where we can't even tell what's true or not because there's so much on social media and everyone has Instagram, TikTok, TikTok, Facebook. So in a way, and today with the camera and technology we have, we are making our own pictorial graph book without realizing it. The same way that the Aztecs did by making their books with all stories and no words.
That brings me to graffiti. So what would we miss in graffiti if we looked at it too quickly?
If you looked at graffiti and you just like saw it and walked away, you would actually miss quite a bit on there. First of all, you would have to understand the history of graffiti, which is interesting in itself because graffiti by itself was actually a term that was used by ancient Greek artists, which actually meant carving into the wall or artwork on a wall, roughly. And if you take that definition, you would see that graffiti's been around since caveman, since Egyptians, since the Greeks, since the Romans, since Mesoamericans, and on and on and on. The other thing you would miss about graffiti is if you look at it, the red and blue can. Blue was significant with the Aztecs. It represented some major gods. It represented empires. It had a very profound statement among the Aztecs that meant purity and clean. That's why turquoise was very valuable to the Aztecs. The reason why red is in there is because that is what the Aztecs used a lot when they're in their books. They would call their books the red and black because that is what they used to do their pictographs. So that's why you have the red paint, the blue spray paint, and then the black hat with the blue jewel in the center.
So finally, tell us about divine light.
Divine light is actually the last one, and it's the capstone to close everything out. So back again to the Aztecs, where they celebrated and how they celebrated and what they did. Every single home had a personal altar inside their home. So the Aztecs would use flowers, incense, or any other type of offerings to that altar. Well, again, as times went on, things started to change, started to go away. And then the Aztecs saw that more and more and more that their religion and their culture was being taken away by the Spaniards. So what they did was they went ahead and encapsulated their gods and their religion into the Roman Catholic faith, traded their gods into saints. As time went on, that became the norm. So now within the Mexican community, you have veladoras, which are religious candles. And they have home altars where they put flowers and candles and pictures of other religious icons, and they make prayers and everything like that. So divine light is actually a mixture to show the Aztec side and what the Mexicans do now for Catholic belief. But as you can see in divine light, I still have a lot of Aztec symbolism in there. And if you look, you'll have the skull, again, iconic, Day of the Dead. They were heavily into that. Then of course the flowers in the eyes, which is a symbolism, the candle for the fire to light the path and the way. You have the cross in the background with blue, turquoise, just to symbolize that. And then the Christianity aspect of it. Then you have the light coming down to show holiness. And then you have the candles rising up as in divine spirituality is happening throughout.
I think something fun to kind of note in your work is that your coloring and your lighting is, in my opinion, very Caravaggio influenced. And just seeing the dark highlighting the light and the contrast is one of the things that always drew me to your style. It's one of those nods to the Grand Masters, because that's like when all that was happening, the Spanish Inquisition and the conquests and all that stuff. So it's one of those things that has always kind of rung in the back of my mind about what makes your work so important and so technically beautiful is that aspect. It's just really fun to see and to watch and just to experience.
You're definitely right on the money about Caravaggio and having an influence on my painting style. I admired the way that he painted, how he used the light and the dark. It just drew me in. The way that he was able to make those colors pop against that darkness was just amazing, and I enjoyed it, and that was definitely an influence.
I'm really excited to see this series finally come to be. It's just really exciting. What do you want people to know most about this series?
The thing that I'm excited about for people to know and what I want them to take away from this is to understand that as people, as a whole, that we are connected in more ways than one, more ways than what anybody realizes. That either we are connected directly from the same cultural heritage background, or we're connected indirectly from different cultures that have similar stories or the same stories. That's what I wanted to show, is I wanted people to look at themselves in their own way and do their own family history search to find their actual own foundation to build upon, so they have a solid root and grounding of who they are themselves and build a foundation upon a solid rock.
The idea of discovering that identity is really what makes your series so incredible and just so beautiful. That's it, man. This is great. You're awesome. I really believe in it. I think what you're doing is incredible. I love you as a person and as an artist. I think it's a wrap, baby.
Right on.
All right, brother. Hey, have a great night. Thanks again.